Hey y'all, welcome back to the 4 Degrees to the Streets podcast. I'm your host, Jasmine Jones-Bynes. It is a pleasure to have you back rocking out with the show. I hope y'all are doing well out there in the world for real. Thank you for consistently supporting the show. You can find us on Instagram and on Substack at the number 4 Degrees Pod. We drop episodes once a month on YouTube, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at the number 4 Degrees Pod. So let's get into this topic today. I have been going back and forth in my head about run clubs, tennis groups, yoga in the park series, the guys that do calisthenics, and trying to understand how all of these fitness and wellness groups fit within the context of urban planning and community organizing. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how run clubs and tennis groups and yoga in the park series, what I like to call as outdoor recreational social clubs, are really examples of activism and community organizing. When 700 people show up to do yoga in the park in a historically Black neighborhood, that's more than just health and wellness. That's community building, that's empowerment, that's reclaiming spaces. And I think in this conversation, I want to put all of these different social clubs in that context. Probably one of my first experiences in Los Angeles, which has a culture of being physically active. I think people on the West Coast, because of the mountains and the weather, are generally a bit more outdoor recreational than people on the East Coast. But in my experience in LA, I went in 2024 to Actively Black, which is a Black owned athleisure fitness brand and clothing brand. They did a Juneteenth bike ride from Hollywood all the way to Venice Beach, 15 miles in one direction, so a 30-mile bike ride loop in honor of Juneteenth. And we all met up at this Black-owned bar in Hollywood on Hollywood Blvd and rode our bikes through some really big corridors like La Cienega Blvd and Venice Boulevard. And in doing so, right, in mass of like 100 plus Black people celebrating Juneteenth, as I rode my bike down Venice Boulevard and past Venice High School, I had to really reflect on the sheer size of that moment, right? I am in community, in unity with my Black brothers and sisters, riding down these really heavily trafficked arterial corridors, knowing the context of police brutality and systemic racism that exists in this country. That to me is what I really want to come out of this conversation, is that I see these social clubs, these recreational clubs, as examples of activism and community organizing, and I want to kind of share that and run that past you guys also. So let's get into it. I want to be clear that I'm not the first person to have this idea. Many of the founders of organizations like Ebony Beach Club and Walk Good LA and Black Events LA understand and put into context how their organization and the things that they're working towards fit within community organizing and activism. And there's people, scholars long before me, like Charles Brown, the author of Arrested Mobility, and Nidra Detweiler, the founder of Civil Bikes, have always been talking about the concepts of arrested mobility, barriers to the movement of Black people, and how we can gather to ride bikes, to walk, to hike, to do yoga as ways of resisting and advocating for our community and advocating for safe spaces. Thinking about the organizations that I'm familiar with, the ones that I follow on social media, I want to highlight some examples of outdoor recreational social clubs. I know we've all seen the post about all the fine men at the run clubs. Let me run through some of my favorite run clubs. Keep It 100, Compton Run Club. Walk Good has a run club that operates in Mid-City. Fitness Run Club in Oakland, and the Motion Run Club in Atlanta are some of the ones that I follow online. I can see them taking up spaces like Lake Merritt out there in Oakland, or the Atlanta Beltline down there in Atlanta. Or for Keep It 100, running down Crenshaw and Market Street in Inglewood, California. You have all these different tennis clubs. You now have the pickleball clubs. You have these golf empowerment organizations, outdoor sports teams for organized sports, whether it's kickball. There's a group out here in LA, Recess Kickball League. You have basketball groups, football groups, flag football groups. All those things kind of fit into this same era. What I also want to highlight is groups that are not necessarily circled around athletics, but around leisure. So you have these markets. You have Black on the Block. You have Black Market Flea. You have Prosperity Market. These are kind of flea market-esque organizations that organize vendors of Black-owned brands, whether it's for jewelry or for clothing or exclusively for food, like in the case of Prosperity Market. I think those are also examples of community organizing. You have these community walks that happen. Black Events LA does a community walk in different neighborhoods. They've been in Manchester, they've been in Hyde Park. And then finally, and this is one that I thought was super interesting and very, very unique to LA, was Reparations Club, which is a Black woman-owned book club in LA, that they host these read in the park sessions. And so I went to Los Angeles State Historic Park in downtown LA, and it was a beautiful gathering of Black women, Black men, Black families, seeing fatherhood and motherhood in a public park, and all centered around the themes of reading. And so what I want to highlight in this episode is that Black people are gathering for the purpose of positivity, for athletics, for health, for wellness, for reading, for obtaining knowledge. And I think that's a beautiful thing that really, in recording this episode, I want to celebrate that about our Black history and about our Black culture. Some of the things I want to highlight as it pertains to the benefits of these outdoor recreational social clubs. On a broad level, whether you're white or Black or Asian, or you live in a neighborhood that has mobility challenges, or you live in a neighborhood that is very transportation forward and has so many options for how you can get around, I think the same tenets around being physically active, building community, building relationships, having the ability to connect with humans in a real space, especially in 2026, that is such a rare interaction. All of those things benefit you regardless of your background when you're going into these run clubs. But when I think about how these outdoor recreational groups fit within the context of urban planning, I see them as democratizing public space. So much of our public space has been policed or privatized, or in some way, shape, or form prohibits people from being free and using that space the way that they see fit. And so I see these outdoor social clubs as democratizing public space, as creating third spaces, right? This concept of your home, your work, and then this other space where you can be in community and be in place. Sometimes that's libraries, sometimes that's religious institutions. Can we conceptualize and think of them as the streets themselves, the parks themselves? And then finally, doing so, right? Running down Crenshaw, running down La Cienega, running down Flatbush Avenue for my people in Jersey, running in New York, running down Broadway in Newark, running down 14th Avenue in Newark, for example, running down Eastern Avenue in New Brunswick, for example. Those are heavily trafficked corridors in which vehicles, miles traveled is the top priority, right? How quickly and how many vehicles can we get through this intersection is always the goal when you're thinking about transportation engineering. But then you have these run clubs or these walking groups or these tennis facilities that show up and they use the space even though it may not be maintained the way that they need it to be maintained, or they're not asking for permission. They're not waiting to get a police escort to go on a jog in their neighborhood. And I think that for urban planners is something we need to champion and support and take heed of how people are using the spaces that we've created, whether we've created them for good or for bad. But when I think about these outdoor recreational social clubs in the context of Black people's lived experience in urban planning, I see them this way. As Black people gathering in public space, in large masses, for the benefit of health, wellness, or education. And to me, that is empowering for those members participating in that run club or in that tennis tournament or in that kickball league. And I think it's important to place those activities in the right context of community organizing. Not all community organizing involves working for a local official or trying to be on the planning commission or trying to be on a board member for a community land trust. In some ways, it's showing up in community, in solidarity, and in unity, and doing something that is uncommon in that particular space. If I could dig into why I see them as community organizing a bit further, let me do so. Urban planning urban policy is designed to hinder the mobility of Black people. You have Black people first segregated into particular neighborhoods, and then those neighborhoods overburdened with a high concentration of hazardous land uses and noxious land uses. And then by the time that the market sees that that neighborhood has value, the Black people who have been living there, building community there, are displaced through gentrification. And so when you see 100 people show up at the corner of Market Street in Inglewood to run every Wednesday a 5K, that's bigger than just, oh, I care about my own health and wellness, or I want to lose these 10 pounds. That is community organizing. That is literally gathering masses, hundreds of people for the same purpose, for the purpose of exercise and mobility. But then you're doing so in a space that has all this history, all this policy, all these policing efforts surrounding it. And so when we do that, we're reclaiming space, we're positively affirming our belonging in community, we're strengthening our ties within our community, and we're resisting against the institutional and systematic barriers to our freedom of mobility, our freedom of just being ourselves in society. And I think that doing all of that within the context of health and wellness is the empowering piece. So if we can look at the examples of how planning, policing, and economics shape neighborhoods for better or worse, I think of 3 examples. I think of street and neighborhood design. I think of housing value and neighborhood value, as well as policing and police enforcement. So let's take each of those in turn. When you're thinking about street and neighborhood design, you have to realize that all neighborhoods are not created equal. There are some neighborhoods that are plagued with highways, plagued with county roads, plagued with high arterial or heavily trafficked roadways, and some that are really small neighborhood 15 mile per hour one-way streets. You have some communities that have an abundance of parks and green space and places to ride your bike and to lay outside in the sun. And then you have some neighborhoods where if you don't have a private outdoor space in your apartment, in your home, you don't have any space to go unless you're willing to drive, a couple miles away to the next town or to the next county large park system. And so just to highlight some data there, Smart Growth America is a transportation and urban planning policy equity research group. They put out a report every year called Dangerous by Design. And every single year that they've been putting it out, the number of pedestrian fatalities across the U.S. has consistently increased. That is to say that pedestrians, people walking and navigating throughout their community, are being impacted by traffic fatalities, either with a vehicle, with a motorcycle, or with trucks, unfortunately. And so if you look at the data, how is that dispersed across the United States? There's roughly 2 deaths per 100,000 white people, and then 4 deaths per 100,000 Black people across the U.S. in the year of 2024. So that's twice the rate. What that's telling you is there is something about the design of neighborhoods in which Black people are traversing that's different from the experience of our white counterparts. A lot of that can be found in the research. It's the presence of pedestrian infrastructure like street lights and wait signals and crosswalks and speed humps to make sure that people aren't traveling too quickly. It's also the design of the roadway. If you have a street that says the speed limit is 25 miles per hour, but the road has 14 wide road lanes, am I really going to go 25 miles per hour? Then you take into account the outdoor space. Okay, so if I can't be physically active for utility purposes or recreational purposes on the streets, what about the open spaces, the parks, the plazas, the tennis courts, the pools, the other recreational amenities that cities generally offer? The Trust for Public Land is another research think tank advocacy group which advocates for public lands. The Trust for Public Lands advocates for public lands like national parks, county parks, regional park systems in the U.S. And they found that across the top 100 largest cities in the U.S., so that goes all the way from LA and New York down to Minneapolis, they found that on average predominantly white neighborhoods have twice the amount of park acreage than predominantly non-white and Black neighborhoods, and that's across the top 100 metros. So it's a very prevalent, a very common issue across the United States, that neighborhoods in which minorities live don't have the same access to infrastructure that supports health and wellness just on a day-to-day basis, right? New York City Community Parks Initiative is a perfect example of this. They did a survey of parks across all 5 boroughs and found that in neighborhoods where the community was predominantly white, the park had been renovated 2 or 3 times over. They had capital improvements 2 or 3 times over, whereas neighborhoods that were predominantly black, like Bed-Stuy and Harlem and Flatbush in the South Bronx, they hadn't had any park renovations, any capital improvements in the last 20 years. So there's a sheer disparity. One, neighborhoods have more, and then neighborhoods are getting more resources, more renovations, more capital improvements than black neighborhoods. And that's where you start to see those health disparities, why asthma and diabetes and obesity are higher in some neighborhoods than in others, has a lot to do with the presence of healthy and wellness options and amenities in that community. The second thing I want to talk about is policing and aggression from civilians. We all know instances of very public and very tragic police brutality and police shootings that have unfortunately resulted in death of a countless number of black Americans traveling, whether on foot or in car, in this country. But then you have the system. You have the system of policing, the system of enforcement that creates certain laws that police certain people's behavior more than other people's behavior. But specifically in New York, 85 to 95% of all of the people stopped from 2008 to 2012 through New York City stop and frisk were black and Latino men, except for the fact that they only make up like 20% each of the population. A sheer disparity in over-policing of neighborhoods in which there are black people. And what does that do? That prohibits our ability to move freely in our community. 2 things you can reference for this. Yolanda Davis Overstreet has a film out called Biking While Black, which explores the barriers to mobility in Los Angeles. And ProPublica has a Walking While Black entire series about walking in the state of Florida. The other thing that's important to highlight here is aggression from civilians. It's important to remember that not all of the instances of brutality or crime against black people have come at the hands of police officers. Some of it has come at the hands of people playing police or taking on a role bigger than their own. George Zimmerman, for example, was not a police officer. He was a community member, part of a similar neighborhood watch organization, and that ended up having that young man, Trayvon Martin, ultimately killed right there in his own community. And so we have things like that parents have to remind their children of when they leave the house, just that they're going to the park with their friends or they're going on a drive around the corner, to be careful of what lurks out there in the community. The final thing I want to talk about as it pertains to the barriers, systemic and institutional barriers to the mobility and the freedom of movement and the freedom to just be a black person in public space that makes run clubs and yoga in the park groups so important is this concept of a systemic undervaluation of assets. And one of the things I like to point to whenever I get to this topic is Andre Perry's book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. I often reference this because the research that came out of this paper, this book, is so important. He finds that homes in majority black neighborhoods with the same amenities and the same quality as homes in majority white neighborhoods are valued 23% less, representing about $156 billion in losses to black landowners and black communities. Why does that happen? How does it happen that this same house, built in 1941 with 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom and 950 square feet in a black neighborhood, is valued 23% less than that same 1947 home with 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom in a white neighborhood? How does that happen? Because the market, financial markets, real estate markets, even when comparing apples to apples, values the apple owned by a black person, the apple associated by a black person, less than the apple associated with someone else. And it results in a robbery of wealth and a robbery of opportunity for not only individual landowners, but the entire community. How much land is valued ripple effects into property taxes, which ripple effects into school quality and transportation quality and road quality and all these different domino effects. You have the policing and the system of surveillance that exists in public space. You have the lack of infrastructure and amenities to support leisure and physical activity, and then you have the isolation and the undervaluation of black assets, all coming together to hinder our ability to access wealth, to access capital, to sustain economic prosperity. It also causes us to have more health consequences and more health burdens like asthma and COPD and diabetes and heart disease and lung cancer because of all these things. Yet we prevail. Let me highlight some of the organizations that I'm familiar with that are actively trying to combat these challenges that we face in our neighborhoods. The first one is Ebony Beach Club. As it says on their Instagram, the Black Beach Renaissance. This was started after Justin Howes, I apologize if I said your name wrong, Justin, also known as Brick, founded Ebony Beach Club after a very traumatic experience surfing in Manhattan Beach. From that, Brick founded Ebony Beach Club, and he named it after the never materialized Ebony Beach Club from the 1950s in Santa Monica. Way back when, in 1950, which is actually really not that long ago, Silas White, a black man, he purchased the land at 1811 Ocean Avenue in Santa Monica, California, about 2 blocks from the ocean, with the desire of creating a black beach club. There are tons of social clubs and beach clubs in Santa Monica that at the time were restricted access to white patrons only. So he wanted to create his own. What ends up happening is he buys the land, and then the city of Santa Monica condemns his property through eminent domain. Check out our previous episodes to learn more about eminent domain. Condemns his property, he doesn't receive compensation for that. They end up building a hotel, and the Ebony Beach Club is never materialized. Update on that story that the family of Mr. Silas eventually got $350,000, which anybody who knows anything about value of land 2 blocks away from the ocean in Santa Monica knows that wasn't enough money, but I digress. I love Ebony Beach Club for creating some of those more comfortable spaces. But they have had a very difficult time sustaining and continuing to create community organizations. Events are consistently canceled. They receive fines. They receive cease and desist orders, mostly around the law breaking of amplified sound. And if you watch this video on Ebony Beach Club's website, you'll hear the founder, Brick, speak eloquently about how he views that rule, the no amplified sound, as one of those rules that targets the behavior of black people versus the behavior of others. The other organization I want to highlight is Walk Good LA. Walk Good is a yoga and health and wellness nonprofit founded by a family, a brother, a sister, and their cousin here in Los Angeles, Etienne Maurice, Ivy Coco Maurice, and Namaste Marley Ray, yoga enthusiasts and yoga professionals here in the city. They founded Walk Good LA in 2020 after the civil uprising of the many instances of police brutality and police shootings that we had in the country during that summer. They founded it as a way for us to gather in peace and solidarity, to have grounding in meditation, to actually heal from our collective trauma. From there, they've opened up an actual studio. They have yoga teaching training, so you can go there and become a certified yoga teacher. And I love what this organization does because they gather people in historically black spaces. I think that is so important for us to both heal ourselves with yoga and mindfulness and grounding, but also heal the world by showing up in public spaces. And so to end the episode, to kind of put it all into context, I want to highlight why I think these things are important. To me, it's very relevant. The things that are going on in this world are so heavy. There are so many problems. And if you don't have your mind right and your body right and your spirit right and you're not in conjunction with your community, we're never going to be able to make progress. We need each other. We need each other holistically. We need each other in a wellness capacity also. And so this episode, this conversation, this podcast is always about community organizing, always about what can we do to advocate for our neighborhoods, even just little old me. And participating in these outdoor recreational clubs, whether it's showing up every week to run down La Cienega, or doing yoga once a month in a historically Black neighborhood park, or organizing your friends and family to go on a community walk and tour different Black-owned businesses. To me, that is an example of community organizing that needs to be championed. It needs to be put into its appropriate context for celebration. Because not all of us are fit to be a politician or to sit on city council or to run for the zoning board. But showing up with community, showing up with our friends, showing up with our neighbors to be public in space, even amongst all of the barriers, whether that's policing or surveillance or land valuation or lack of infrastructure, to say, I'm still going to be here anyway. This is still my community. This is still the place where I live, a place where I love. And so I want this episode to be celebratory. I want us to walk away from here reminded that even in small things, we can improve the quality of our neighborhoods. So with that, I challenge you to find an organization in your community that aligns with something you already care about, whether it's photography or fitness or yoga or making plants or being in the garden community. Whatever it is that you care about, that you really find joy and passion in, I bet you that there are other people in your immediate neighborhood who care about those things also. Coming together with them is a form of advocacy, is a form of resisting, is a form of reclaiming space that I want each of us to try to take on as we move through the rest of this year. And with that, I'm your host, Jasmine Jones-Bynes. This has been another episode of the 4 Degrees to the Streets podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts at the number 4 Degrees Pod. Share this episode with someone in your community who cares about their neighborhood. Peace out, y'all.